Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the build of our F4s. This is build video number 4 in the series. Last video we primarily focused on the tails right behind me. This video we are going to be kind of still focusing on the tails with the chute mechanism, but working our way forward. So we're going to start to get into the pipes, the afterburners on this guy, the chute mechanism, finishing up the tail hatches and cover plates that go right there, stuff like that. So again, the videos are fairly sporadic with these F4s, or erratic. What our content and what we're covering in the video is fairly erratic. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. So hang tight and we'll dive back in to these F4s. All right, guys, so we shipped our chute that came with my old F4. So we shipped this off to Joe. And Joe, as you know, if you're watch my channel on a regular basis, Joe is RC Custom 3D Printing. His email address is right there. So Joe made up a copy of the Detail for Scale chute kit. So Detail for Scale is no longer in business. Otherwise, we would have happily purchased the chute kit from them. Okay, so here's the original chute kit. What I asked Joe to do was do me a couple things. So number one, make me a new plate that goes in and basically copy this as much as possible. So and that's what he did, which is awesome. So thank you, Joe, for doing this. I appreciate it. So here is the copy chute mechanism. So it's all made out of fiberglass and looks like wood formers and stuff, so it's pretty much an exact copy. Here is the plate that uses magnets to hold itself onto the hatch where it opens up. So we've got that. Magnets are right there. And then the plunger system. So I didn't have a plunger that was long enough to match the original. So what Joe did was he took a Skymaster plunger that I had and he used that. Now we'll have to add an extension on here, but looks awesome. Great job, Joe. Thank you for that. So now we get to work on getting those guys installed in there. So the original Detail for Scale kit came with this guy right here. So what I asked Joe to do was make me up an extra one of these so we don't have to use this generic gray piece. Now we could have got him to print that. Problem is that this is, and obviously this is the wrong color for both of those, and we'd have to try and find a match and paint. So what my plan is we're going to cut this off at the panel line here. This gets installed into the existing cone, which hopefully will work. If not, we'll have to match the plastic one that comes with it, but I think it'll work. And then we put our chute mechanism in. Now when you look at the piece here, it looks like it's an exact match. So we should be able to cut this existing piece off on the panel line and definitely reuse it. So that's going to be one of our next delicate processes. So as a first step here, guys, I took a sharp pencil and drew the line for our cutout. Now the panel line is pretty solid on the top here, but as we come around the bottom, it's not very obvious. So that's why it was critical to use the pencil and draw that out. Now what we'll do is we'll take a pull saw. I think that's going to be the tool of choice here, and Zona saw, pull saw, and we will use that to cut these little tips off. So as we've been doing, I'm going to do the old plane first because that is the test plane, if you will, and then we will do the new plane second. Now if the pull saw doesn't work, we'll end up using the Dremel with the really thin cutoff bits. All right, guys, so we've opened up both of the openings here. There is quite a bit of stuff to sand out. Quite a bit of buildup on each side, so we've sanded that out, which is good. The cap pieces here, we also have to sand those out as well too. We're going to have to sand our plates here that need to fit inside of those caps. And then I think on mine I'm going to end up using the stock one, and I'll just find a silver that'll work for it. But on the new one we'll use the existing cap and make that work. So next thing I'm doing is I'm getting this sanded down to fit inside here, because we have to make this look like that. So we're going to have to basically bevel the back side here, and we want it to go in there enough so it kind of looks exactly like that. All right guys, so we got the chute mechanism all done in the older aircraft. I still haven't glued the pins in for the door, but what I did here was tape the hatch in place, and then was able to slide the chute guide back all the way, so there's no guessing as far as the position of it goes. So what we can do now, if we take this off, is whatever position the guide is in, because we screwed the guide in place. The guide's been screwed down right there. So that's what the instructions call for. So we take this off now, and that's where the guide is the happiest. So what we need to do now is we're going to glue these pins in, and we're going to get this taped back in place again, and then once those pins are glued, then this thing will work like it should. So that's awesome. That worked out good. One thing with the elevator setup here is you definitely have to leave the center section wide open if you're doing a chute. You can see there that basically there can be nothing in the center of those arms. So I fought with this a little bit. It was quite a struggle because of all the amount of Loctite I used, but I did manage to get all my bolts off. And I'm just going to redo this linkage hardware much like the other one. So we're going to put a little conical spacer in there, put the ball joint on there, and then we'll be nice and straight on those linkage arms. So going together well, just obviously have to make some adjustments. All right, so we have our first door here complete. Worked out good. Definitely a learning process with this, but next thing we need to do is we need to take out the chute. Now, this is kind of an important thing. In my mind initially, I thought this all got glued in place. It doesn't. It needs to remain floating. So you can see there we still have some movement. I had a little bit of epoxy kind of spill over onto the fuselage, but I was able just to cut that out with a knife. So that worked out good. So all we need to do now to take the tube out is undo that one screw right there, and then our tube will pop out. Now the reason we need to undo the tube is we need to put a little notch in the bottom, and we need to glue a piece of wood with an eyelet for our chute to mount to. So those are kind of important steps that we need to get completed. And we may not actually do that stuff right now. And the reason for that is because we don't have our chutes to put in here yet. So I'm going to skip over doing the covers on here, skip over pulling the tube out to get the chute mounted, because we don't want to pull this out, mount the little piece of wood, put this back in, pull it out again. It just is a waste of time. So the chute for now is done. I did have to run this wood a little bit lower. So the instructions, the original instructions just said, you know, tuck this up, screw it in place, and you're good. Problem is, when you go to put this hatch over top like this, the piece of wood is in contact right here because it's coming down at this angle. So what I had to do was I put a piece of 1/8 inch ply underneath here. Fortunately, we've got nice long screws, so that wasn't a problem. This one, I just backed out the screw and did the screw back up a little bit, put some CA on there, and it is it's solid. So now we've got enough clearance where our hatch can go on. So for now, our tail section is complete. Our chute mechanism is complete on the old aircraft. Now we just need to repeat all of that stuff on the new aircraft. We did get our everything glued in to the original tail piece yesterday. So getting this installed should be fairly straightforward, but we'll get this accomplished and I'll show you guys the results. All right, so we're still working on the new aircraft tube install there. I figured I would show you guys what I did with the elevator setup. So what I'm pointing out is right there at the tip of my finger. It's a dab of 20-minute high sol, and there's also another one on that side there. So to give you some perspective here, when you put the elevator in, what happens is it kind of keyholes in the front. There's a little slot that locks in with the plywood, and then you put 2 screws in the back. You've seen that if you've watched any of this F4 build. Now, what happens is the screws prevent the elevators from doing this, but the slot has to be big enough that you can get it in, but there's a little bit of side-to-side play this way. So the reason for those globs of high sol is to prevent this from happening. Is it necessary? I don't know, but I just want to make sure that we don't have any issues and make it as accurate as possible. So that's the reason I did it. Now the downside to it, obviously the elevator is not easy to take off. It's not easy to take off on this plane anyways, but if we ever were needing to get to the rudder servo, which is directly underneath here, that would need to come out. So, but even then, if you need to get the rudder servo, you're taking off the chute mechanism, you're disconnecting the elevators, so it's a big process regardless. In this case, if we did need to get to it, all we would do is take a Dremel and we would just Dremel out our high sol, the globs, and then we'd be able to take the elevator out. So just wanted to show you guys that, one of those little things I did and was thinking about. All right guys, and while we are working on the chute mechanisms, we're also painting the turkey feathers, the inside, with BVM heat shield, the ceramic paint. So this does a couple things. Number one, it helps with dealing with heat, right? So the pipes come fairly low on these guys just because the angle that needs to happen. But on the new aircraft, we're also doing afterburner lights in there. So this helps reflect all the afterburner lights and really makes them pop as well. So, all right, so the new aircraft is complete for the chute mechanism, all done. Exactly the same as the older aircraft. So I got the air compressor hooked up here, so I will operate the chute and you can see what happens. Beautiful. All right, so very common question. How do you get so much done? Well, I'll show you. We have 6 months of not exactly this, but this is pretty much it. Welcome, this is what we get to deal with. All right, guys, with both of these tails complete, man, these are a good looking pair of aircraft. All right, with both of these tails complete, we have turned the aircraft over, and that is awesome. Now we got a couple things to do here. We're going to be flipping back and forth between planes. So first thing I want to do is this area is still not, in my opinion, worthy of holding 6 liters of fuel. So I'm going to either lay down some fiberglass or carbon fiber along this whole bottom area. I'll see what I have, probably fiberglass, and we're going to get that laid in place and completed. And then we're going to start working on the engine portion of this aircraft. The old plane, now some of this stuff's already been done already, which is awesome. If you're watching this video, thank you so much for doing this stuff. So we've got a couple things to do. The pipe's already kind of laid out. These rails were made and everything was raised up to a 5 or 6 degree angle here. You can see that things have been changed. And these rails were designed around, I think, an AMT Olympus. So what I've done is I've gotten everything laid up with my Swiwen 220 and we've marked out our new holes that we have to create. Now the center hole there is for the screw that's got to go through the block here to hold everything together. So that's kind of what we're working on with the old plane, getting the engine mounted, going to get the bypass figured out, stuff like that. So I think the first thing we'll do just to conserve time is get that fiberglass installed right there. All right, so we added some reinforcement there. Did the carbon first, and that's 6-ounce heavy cloth, and then we put 3-ounce fiberglass down, so we're letting that cure. And moving on to the old one here with the engine install. So got the rails all figured out. I thought I was going to drill new holes, which I actually did drill. Then I filled them in and ended up reusing the old holes and just countersinking them because we got 2 layers of carbon here, so nice and thick. So just added a countersink, and we've got our bolts holding like they were originally designed. So rails are installed right now. Pipe is installed. I got 1 washer underneath there like it's been instructed or originally set up. So what we'll do now is we'll put the Swiwin 220 in here, and we're going to kind of see how it's going to fit with the lower portion of the bypass. Now we're just installing the lower portion of the bypass. We're not doing the upper portion, I don't think. Yeah, we're not going to do the upper portion, but we do need to cut the bypass, I think, at the front here. So that's going to be a bit of a chore to set up. But first, let's see if our holes that we drilled for the engine actually line up. All right, so single engine is installed. It looks like the bolt holes and everything lined up good. We've got our centering piece there, and that looks good. Now we do have some movement here, a little bit of movement because they're 3mm bolts, but we're really close to exactly where we need to be. So that's good. Now if you look at the bypass here, here we are. So the front definitely needs to be cut a fair bit in order to fit in here, but it's going to work out well. The primary goal with the bypass is to keep the heat off of the airlines, which will be going out of those holes right there. So we definitely needed the bypass. That's the reason for it. On the twin, we're going to build 2 little shields there to protect the airlines. It's important stuff, and that's really the only reason we're doing it. On this plane, there's no gear openings or anything to prevent grass, but yeah, it's just to protect the wiring. All right, so we've got the engine installed on the rails. That is all done. Everything's lined up. Everything's good. We got it all lined up to our mount here. So what this allows us to do is we've got to put some epoxy on the backside of some of these nuts and fastening items, because we put new bolts through the engine, one back here for the bypass lower section. So the nice thing about this is we can unbolt everything that's holding the engine down and pull this all out as one piece. Now, I did leave the bolts out of the middle section. Obviously, if we had those in there, we wouldn't be able to take the engine out on the rails, but we'll be able to take this out now and basically take the whole thing out, keep it all together, keep it all accurate and spaced properly, and then we can put epoxy on the back side and then get that ready and curing. So I'm going to pull this out, and then we will start working on the engines for the twin. All right, so we are working on the engines here. Did a couple things last night before I called it quits. So there's a nut on the underside of this that the black bolt goes through. Now that nut is obviously bolting the G10 plate onto the turbine. Now these turbines need to be mounted on the underside of the rail, and I'll talk a little bit about why that needs to happen. So the F4 by design needs about 5 degrees-ish of down thrust. Okay, so they've already accomplished that on their rails. We've talked about this or looked at this before. So if we put a angle finder here on the fuselage, we're at basically 0. Put it on the rails, we have a 5-degree downslope. So if we were to put the engines on the top side here and have the pipe coming up to be centered on the exhaust cones, what happens is that pipe now has such an angle, it ends up at about 8 to 9 degrees of angle, which isn't correct. So if we take these engines, hi buddy, if we take these engines and put them on the underside of these rails, what that does is our pipes, what that does is our engines still have the 5-degree down angle because that's built into the rails. But then our pipe, when that comes to meet up with the engines, that also has a 5-degree down angle. So step number 1 is we need to get these engines mounted on the rails. Now what I've done here is we've made up these G10 plates. And as you're kind of in the way, bud, we've made these G10 plates, and we need to get holes drilled through. So we need to get holes drilled through so everything's nice and centered. So I've also put a little bit of, I don't really want to pull that out, but a little bit of 4mm Festo tubing on the nut, and what that's on the bolt, and what that's done is that's centered the engine in these rails side to side. So we're nice and tight, we know we're centered side to side. And what I'm thinking of doing now is drilling these 4 holes, and then we'll be able to take these plates, bolt them on the underside with bolts through the plates and the engine rails, and that's going to be the best way to mount these engines. Now, the reason I high-solid those nuts on the other side is when this is all flipped on the underside of the rails, the easiest way to get these engines out is going to be to undo the 4 bolts right there. G10 plates stay in place, engine just pops out, no problem. So that's what we're doing. And I think it should work out good. That's the plan I've been thinking about for a few days. We're going to get the engines mounted and sorted, and then we'll work on the pipes, because the pipes don't have a great mounting system already. So that is what we're working on. All right, so we have drilled all the holes for the engine. Now the goal here is that we can pull these engines out now, undo the plates, and just be able to bolt those plates from the other side, and everything's going to line up beautifully. I think it's going to be good because we've got everything fastened in place nice and tight. Everything's accurate. So we're going to pull those engines out, clean up the dust, and bolt those plates in. All right, our Zykoi 120s are all mounted, happy with the way everything turned out. They are solid, accurate, and removable fairly easy. So that worked out really good. Next thing we're going to move on to is the pipe mounting. Now that's going to be a lot more of a challenge because there's not a set way for these pipes to mount. The Skymaster has installed these straps on here. I am not a fan of using these straps. So we're going to play around with these next and see what the best solution is. I may glue a block or something onto the bottom. That may be an option as well, and maybe a combination of that block and the straps. We'll have to see how things work out. So, but the engines are done, which is great. All right, so step number 1 for the pipe mounting is we got to get the intake portions of the pipe mounted. Now we could just jam these all the way down, and that would be awesome. The problem is that we need some distance from front to back. These engines are so small that if we jam the bell mouth all the way in like that, tuck the pipes all the way forward, they're fairly buried inside the turkey feathers. So on my plane here, we've got about 1 inch from the end of the exhaust to the end of the turkey feathers. So that's kind of what we're looking for on this other aircraft. So on the new one here, what I've done is I've taken the aluminum piece here, just popped it on the bench, put the Sharpie against it on top of this 1/4 inch piece of plywood, spun it, and that gives us a line where we can bury this much into the pipe. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get that portion installed. We'll just hold it in one spot, drill through both of them, and we'll put 3 rivets into each of these pipes here, so we've got our rivets all ready as well. All right, bell mouths are all mounted to the pipes. What we're doing now is we're getting the pipes lined up. So one engine's been reinstalled here. We've got a mark on the bottom of the fuselage that I used a straight edge like this to line up the tail cone of the pipe, and just drew that Sharpie mark there. One other interesting thing is you can actually, that mark is right on the back edge of this hole in the fuselage right here. So it is handy to be able to look in there and see where everything lines up. So what we've done as well is put the pipe in with the engine in, taken spacers, installed them underneath the pipe, and then you can look through the back end and you can make sure that that gets 100% centered. Now the point of the spacers is this is how we are going to hold our pipe in place. So what we're going to do now that we have the height for the bottom of the pipe is we can take a piece of wood like this and we can shape that pipe in there and bring that, that U shape to the top of those pieces of wood. And then the pipe will have a nice spot to sit into. We can make a mounting system, like having the bell mouth mounted on the face here. We can put 2 screws in there. So it's just going to be a nice, solid, easy way to mount that pipe in place. And then if you want to take the pipe out, you undo your screws and the pipe slides out. So, but getting those spacers were critical. So we've got the one side. The other side should be a perfect match as well too. Obviously before we glue anything, we're going to make sure and double check all that stuff. So next thing to do is create our pipe supports here. All right, so tank supports are all made up. We just need to glue them in place. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, I've marked out on the bottom of the fuselage there with a Sharpie marker, just a line so I know where to put the glue. So what we'll do now is we'll push those pipes backwards, mix up some high sol, lay that down on our mark, and get those pipe supports glued in place. Now we are going to put some additional support behind it, but the problem is that we don't want to do that now. We want to get this in the right spot, get it measured side to side and everything, get it in the right spot, let it cure, and then we can add additional supports afterwards. The reason for the additional support is that piece glued in place is good, but doesn't allow any forward and backward support other than the glue joint on the bottom. So if we add some blocking in behind it, that's going to add the support front to back, making sure that that never comes off unless we never want it to come off. So that's what we're going to do next. And then once we get that done, we just have to leave this part of the fuselage to do its thing. So I think we're going to use West Systems, the 610, because I got a brand new tube, and that's what we're going to use in there. And then we're going to start moving on to things like painting the new landing gear leg, getting the fittings glued in the tank, and that kind of stuff. All right, guys, and it is tip time, and this tip time has been brought to you by trusty bent screwdriver. All right, so one thing I like to do on a scale plane like this with lots of tanks is try and plan the plumbing from the get-go. So we're doing a few, well, we've got 3 tanks on this aircraft. So we have the front tank, the 2 saddles. Lots of different ways to plumb this. Some guys will plumb the main tank, the front tank filling, going to the saddles, so the saddles pull first, and then the main tank drains last. We're not going to do that. We're going to drain the saddles last, the front tank first, because the front tank is so far in front of the center of gravity. So what I like to do is I like to plan everything out. Now all these tanks are going to be in series, meaning they're going to fill individually and then fill the next one. So our path here, basically, when we're filling fuel, it's going to fill through the pickup line, out the vent, through the pickup line, out the vent, through the pickup line, out the vent to the outside of the aircraft. But depending on the type of vent line you're using, you want to make sure you try and pre-plan some of this stuff. So we're using a DreamWorks fitting like this. Now the reason we're using the fitting, the high flow fitting on this aircraft is because we have a 220 Newton air turbine, or 240. On the other aircraft, because we've got 120s, there's no need for something like this. So what we're going to do is, I've already checked this out. We do have enough room with the hatch because these sit right here. But I've already planned this whole fuel line thing out. So this fitting gets glued in. It's going to come, these fittings are coming straight out. But our vent fittings are going right at the front here. We're going to glue some vent fittings in. And the best way for those to come out is to poke forward. Then we can go down underneath the intake. This one goes forward towards the front tank. This vent line comes out this way, and it's going to go straight down to our vent line outside the aircraft. So depending on, of course, the fittings you're using, try and pre-plan as much of this stuff as possible. We could have that fitting just facing forward, and that would still be okay, but if you can offset it a little bit, that's even better. So just do some pre-planning with your fuel system and try and think ahead as much as possible. So there's a few things we need to do to get the tanks ready. Number one, get the fittings prepared. So you can see there, just ran them across the Dremel to add a little bit of texture on both sides. We've opened up the holes as well too and got that all taken care of. And what I like to do with the vent fittings is get that hole opened up and then use a bit of CA, thread this guy in, and then kind of create threads in there so you can adjust the height and it sits in nicely. So last step here was to sand around each of the openings, and we are going to glue these fittings in place. So you have to pay attention to the way these things show up. The smooth side goes on the outside, so your O-ring has something to seat against too, and the threads go on the interior portion of the tank. So the 3 old tanks are ready to go. Other thing was we had an impact at some point on the tank here, so sanded this area down, and we'll use some high sol or whatever we're using to just seal those up. I don't know at this point if all those cracks would leak, but easier just to take care of it now. And then on the new tanks here, we're using some Model Aviation fittings, some MAP fittings, and these are the bung fittings you can get from them. And did the same thing, added the Dremel score mark all the way around, but these do hold better because they've got the holes drilled in them. So you put high sol all around here, push it into place, and then you get the high sol or your adhesive coming through those little holes, which just helps hold everything together. So we're going to get all these tanks glued up. I've only got a little bit of high sol 9462 left, so we're going to use that on the new tanks, and we'll probably use some West System stuff, maybe 20-minute high sol on the old aircraft tanks. All right, guys, we got all of our tanks glued now. So the new tanks have their Model Aviation MAP fittings installed, and we've got our vent fitting on the top of that one tank. The reason the weight's on there is because that face of the tank has a bit of a funny angle to it, so it's better if that fitting's just pressed down. And then all of the old tanks have been done as well. While I had the epoxy mixed up, I just went over top of all the cracked areas. So these tanks are done, so we've got to just let them sit till tomorrow. That's kind of where this airframe's at. We've been checking over the pipe mounts to make sure they're still centered and everything. The high sol has started to kick off, which means it's firming up, and the pipes are still in good shape. So we're kind of moving on to random things. There's not a whole bunch of stuff that we can actually do at this point because we can't touch any of the fuselages. So just doing miscellaneous little things. I forgot to show you guys this. So here's all of our blind nuts or nuts that we glued into place yesterday, and we've already slipped this whole assembly in and out of the airframe a few times now, and it works awesome. So this is actually really, really nice. Of course, while the aircraft is built and running, it won't be that easy because we have that one fitting hiding underneath the engine mount. But at least for now, it keeps it all intact and in the right position. What we're doing now is just getting things organized in the old fuselage. So I just opened up these holes right here. That's where the air fittings are going to go into. So on the wings, the excess servo lines can go into the wings, but the excess air lines need to go into the fuselage because the air lines come out where the tire is. So we've opened this up to allow better access for the airlines, and just kind of ran those cables forward, got them stuck in position on the side of the fuselage just using electrical tape and CA. Now the next thing I'm thinking about doing is installing our air tanks, which are going to go in the back section here above the pipe. We can fit quite a few air tanks in there, and they're just going to be siliconed in place. So just kind of thinking and trying to figure out the best way to get this thing upside down and actually be able to work on it. All right, so we got our tanks set up here, the air tanks. Because we have a compressor going on board, we're putting 3 air tanks to supply pressure to all the different systems. So those are ready to get installed. They're going to get siliconed in place. So they've already been siliconed together and then taped together with fiberglass tape. And what we'll do now is we'll just put 2 beads of silicone on the top of the tanks, and they're just going to go in this area right here. So we've created the exact same system for both aircraft, and we'll get those stuck in place and let them cure overnight. And I think that's everything for this evening. All right, guys, next day, and tanks are all cured and ready to go. So it is tank rinsing time. What I use to rinse tanks is isopropyl alcohol, 99%. This works awesome because you can just dump it in the garbage can. It evaporates, it's great. So what I do is pour some of the bottle in there, about half the bottle per tank, swish it around, pour another, the rest of it in there to get the stuff out. Basically, the fine dust is our goal. So we've got these 3 tanks to do. We've got those 3 tanks to do. So rinse time. All right, so when you're dealing with tanks that have funny shapes like this, initially, I think I mentioned this in one of the previous videos or clips, but I was thinking about putting the clunk right here. Now, the downside to that is really, this is the lowest point in the tank, so we would just have the clunk sitting right down there, which doesn't make a lot of sense. You couldn't extend it out because then you're never catching this fuel here. So really the stock location up top here kind of works the best. The other thing too is you're not making a clunk that's floating around. It's basically going in that lower corner, and that's it. So that's also part of the reason why I'm doing these tanks in series like this. So, you know, if you get any air bubbles pulled from the main tank when you first start your flight, they're going to end up in the second tank, and this third tank should really be full almost the entire flight until we're ready to start doing our landing approaches, which we're going to be pretty level on the plane anyways. So that's the theory behind it. So when I'm doing these clunk lines up like this, I'm just getting them tucked down into that bottom corner of the low point in the tank, and that's where they're going to stay. They're really not ever going to move from that spot. All right, guys, so working on these tanks here, old tanks, we've got the fittings in place. I've pressurized the tanks with my mouth. I've only got 2 pairs of forceps, so we're just going to do these 2 tanks at a time. So these are pressurized, waiting to check them in an hour or 2. We've got the front tank hooked up. That's done, but we haven't checked it yet. And we're moving on to the new tanks. Now, without these map fittings, these through fittings, I would never use these Skymaster fittings. We tried initially. I can't remember the last plane. Maybe it was the F-14. But tried to use them. They don't seal at all. Like, it's relying on the tank opening itself to sit in this groove and seal, and it just doesn't work. So that's what these map fittings are for, is they're great because they provide a smooth surface for the fitting to go into, put some silicone lube on here, tighten her down, and they usually work awesome. Other thing I do is put a couple globs of solder on these fittings. That's just to prevent the fitting, once we've tie wired it, from pulling off, and the hose itself will seal against the tube. So great way to do the normal Skymaster fittings. Again, I would never use those Skymaster fittings without these little pieces right here. And what those little pieces are is Model Aviation Products Fuel Stopper Insert Kit. So the kits come with 3 of these. Great little purchase. All right, so I didn't take a shot of the clunk setup here before I put it in, but it's pretty straightforward. We've got our 2 tubes that go back to about here. We've got a little section of Tygon, another full-length tube, and a little section of Tygon attached to the clunk. So we've got both clunks in that tank, right? So we've got 2 pickups. These 2 pickups are going to feed the other 2 tanks below it. That's why we put the vent on here. It's an oversized vent. We're going to have an 8mm Festo line going off to our vent system. So great way to kind of make all of this stuff work. And I think it's going to be a really great setup. So the rest of the lines are all going to be 6mm Festo tubing going in between the tanks, so should be awesome. We've pressurized this one, letting it sit. Pressurized the old main tank, letting it sit. These guys have been sitting for a while, took the clamps off, and they held pressure no problems, so definitely awesome. One thing I'll do when I pressurize a tank like this is pressurize it, and then I take some soapy water, some dish soap with water in it, just spray it around the bung just to see initially right away if there's any leaks around the bung. There wasn't. Spray the fittings, things like that, so we know that the fittings are all good. Now we're just letting the tank sit to see if it holds air pressure. You can also take these tanks and submerge them. I don't mind doing it this way. You know, give it a couple hours or overnight. If it still holds pressure, then you're good. All right, and there's a shot of our one of our primary tank clunks. So we just have this set up. We've got the rigid tube in between, the vent line here. Now, key with the vent line is you never want to cut it flush, because if you cut it flush and it's sitting against the top of the tank, it could seal itself off. So always put the little V cut in there, so even if this is sitting on top of the tank, it still is wide open. So just a little tip for you. Now, when I put these inside the tanks, I put silicone lube all over the perimeter here. That helps get it into the bung fitting and then also keep it nice and sealed. All right, so our final thing in this video, I'm just going to paint up the old fuselage interior section. I've got a bunch of my grays laid out here, and I've decided which one we're going to use. So we've prepped everything off. Now, the thing about this fuselage is you really don't see a whole heck of a lot of area when everything's packed in here, right? You've got the turbine and the bypass there, the tanks in there. So really you kind of only see this area and a bunch of the intakes. So I just want it to be nice and clean looking. So we'll focus most of our paint and stuff on those areas that we are going to be viewing. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time putting some on the bottom there because it's just useless because it's hidden. So anyway, it's going to get this painted up, and prep is really important when you're doing this stuff. I mean, over prep and you'll be a lot happier because you won't get paint everywhere. All right, guys, and that is everything for video number 4 of the pair of Skymaster F-4 aircraft build. I don't know if that made sense, but hopefully you guys are enjoying the series. Trying to make it as detailed as possible, but thanks guys for watching. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. If you're not a subscriber, just a little prompt for you to hit that subscribe button down below. When you hit the subscribe button, there's a little bell beside the subscribe button. If you turn the notifications on, you'll get notified when I release new videos. So that's it, guys. We accomplished lots in this episode. Engines, of course, installed in both aircraft. Chutes installed. Lots done. So we're kind of moving on to not wrapping up the aircraft, but getting a lot accomplished and moving forward towards bolting the nose of the aircraft on. Once we get those nose bolted on the aircraft, that's kind of like the, you know, you're approaching that 75% done point. At least that's the way I kind of look at it. Thanks guys for watching. Appreciate all the support on the channel. That's it. We'll see ya in the next video. Lizzie, are you in the shop, cat? Yeah. I like your collar. So pretty.